A 40-foot fire tornado, one of many swirling through downtown LA. Or this, a 60-mile wall of dust turning the Las Vegas day into darkest night. How about a war over water? Or the Eiffel Tower alive with locusts? All these frightening images have one common denominator. Water. Or the lack of it. Our planet is running out of fresh water, and with global warming and the population exploding, there is less and less of it. So what happens when there isn't enough to go around? What could our waterless world be like in 2025? Today we are running out of water. Climate change has warmed the Earth, altering weather patterns and causing less rain to fall in areas that most need it. And with the world's population growing, there will be a 50% greater demand for water by 2030. There won't be any more water. There will be less.
The situation is very serious. By 2050, if something is not done in terms of water conservation, we could end up with people dying of thirst.
Although 2/3 of our planet is water, less than a 50th is fresh water. And of that, half is inaccessible, locked up in glaciers and the polar regions. The rest flows through our rivers.
Rivers are the blue arteries of the earth. They're the basis of civilization from a human perspective.
But though humans have developed over millennia in a world full of water, the stark reality is things are set to change. And as our freshwater supply dries up, it could trigger devastating scenarios. The impact is obvious in the American Southwest, home to 45 million people. Since 2003, the region has endured a prolonged drought.
The drought now, in our minds, is more than a drought. It's an early warning. It's a wake-up call.
One major city that can't afford to ignore that wake-up call is Las Vegas, home to almost 2 million people. Built in the middle of the desert, this city survives only because 300 million gallons of water are pumped in daily from Lake Mead, 20 miles away. The lake is a reservoir created when the Hoover Dam was constructed across the Colorado River. Less snow in the Rocky Mountains means the river is drying up. Lake Mead has lost a third of its water in the last 10 years. A ring of white magnesium deposits shows the high water mark. As water levels drop, by 2017 Hoover Dam will no longer provide drinking water to Las Vegas, Tucson and San Diego, and it stops generating electricity to Los Angeles. And if nothing is done, the reservoir will be a dry hole by 2021.
We in the United States overuse water resources at a phenomenal rate. All that has to change.
Patricia Mulroy is Southern Nevada's water zero.
Today we are the community with the most aggressive conservation program anywhere in the United States. We've spent $120 million removing turf in Southern Nevada, which is our big consumptive use.
Turf in gardens, public spaces, and even golf courses are being ripped up.
The ironic thing is that 20 years ago we were removing the desert and planting turf, and here it is 20 years later removing the turf and planting desert.
But even Nevada's water czar is powerless to arrest one of drought's deadly consequences: giant dust storms. North America is no stranger to dust storms. In the 1930s, a 10-year drought and poor farming practices ruined 100 million acres of cropland, resulting in monster dust storms. During this time, America's Great Plains became known as the Dust Bowl. Vast areas in the Middle East, China, Australia and Africa are already struck by these giant storms. Dust storms can hit with no warning, causing large-scale death and destruction. Professor Greg Okin studies them and warns of trouble on the horizon.
The impact of blowing sand and dust has been largely ignored in the southwestern United States for a really long time. And I think what we're going to see is that it's going to have an increasingly major impact, not just on agricultural lands, not just on rangelands, but on roads and traffic. Some of the major traffic accidents in the Southwest are caused by dust storms.
Although agricultural practices have improved, population growth means we are now farming, ranching and living in areas that were previously uninhabited.
What we see over here is a surface that is silt clay crust, and this is what the natural playa surface looks like, and this is very resilient to dust storms. In contrast, you can look at this surface over here, which has been degraded, and this, in contrast, is much dustier and much more of a problem for an area like this. This can go for years without emitting any dust, whereas this, just at the slightest amount of wind, will cause a fairly large storm just in this small playa area.
Scientists now think we can once again be creating the conditions for a new dust bowl. And at some point in the near future, Las Vegas could be choked by vast dust storms. It's 2025. The American Southwest is in its 12th year of drought, the worst in almost 1,000 years. Rivers and lakes are only a quarter full. Some have disappeared completely. It's 2 p.m. and an incredible 125 degrees Fahrenheit. As thunderstorms sweep into Nevada from the North Pacific, rapidly rising convection currents suck tons of dust up into the air. By 4 p.m., a wall of dust called a habood has developed. Las Vegas will be its ground zero.
These haboobs are basically big moving walls of black air. If you saw The Mummy, it's like the scenes in The Mummy with the air coming towards you.
At 5 p.m., the dust storm slams into Vegas, a wall of dust 60 miles wide and 3,000 feet tall. People seek shelter wherever they can. McCarran Airport offers no escape. Dust that can choke jet engines and near-zero visibility make flying unsafe. Air traffic is suspended over 6 states, all in the path of this dust storm. Radio and TV broadcast warnings across the region because dust storms are lethal for people in cars.
During certain thunderstorms, you can have downdrafts that travel up to 70 miles per hour. There's almost no way you can outrun a dust storm like that.
The winds are so powerful, they shock blast paint. Visibility is reduced to just 3 feet. For over 2 hours, the city is pummeled. In the storm's wake, parts of Las Vegas are buried under a thick layer of dust 3 feet deep. Las Vegas will survive alive, but that will be a lengthy and expensive clear-up operation.
I don't think our future generations will look at us very kindly at all. I think our future generations will be really disappointed at how we passed the buck, probably too late to them.
By 2100, if global warming persists, large parts of Southeast Asia, Eastern South America, Southern Europe, Africa, Western Australia and the US Southwest will not just turn into dust bowls, they will become full-fledged deserts with valuable farmland lost forever and millions of people displaced. But as water is in increasingly short supply, there is a potential disaster of a very different sort that could be headed for Europe. High temperatures could make conditions perfect for a voracious creature to emerge in the billions. Europe is coming under attack by a massive swarm of locusts. A shortage of water is causing droughts, dust storms and fires to sweep the planet. Hot, dry environments with very little moisture create the perfect conditions for the most destructive pest on Earth, the desert locust. In one day, these insects can eat their own body weight in food, leaving famine in their wake. Cambridge, England. One of the world's top research centres leading the way in the fight to understand the desert locust.
Most of the times, locust exists in a form which not only doesn't swarm, actively detests the presence of other locusts, but under the right circumstances they'll come together. Hunger is overcoming their natural aversion to each other.
In the future, drought will lead to less food, forcing these hungry locusts to group together. Dr. Rogers' research has revealed the Jekyll and Hyde switch is triggered by close physical contact, causing their back legs to rub together, releasing serotonin in their brain. This chemical causes a startling and frightening transformation.
Their appearance completely changes. They become adapted to a life of swarming migration. They're able to fly further and walk further than solitary locusts. And their colour changes dramatically as well. They go from being cryptic, camouflaged animals to being brightly coloured.
So serious is the threat that the United Nations has a locust forecast centre in Rome, monitoring the globe for early signs of potential swarms.
The desert locust is probably the world's most dangerous insect pest. This is because of the amount of food that a locust swarm can consume can have a dramatic effect on a family, on a village, on an entire nation, on an entire continent.
Dr. Cressman is worried that African locust plagues could move further north, striking deep into Europe.
By 2025, with the effects of climate change, there is a possibility that southern Europe could be a much hotter and a much drier place. This would benefit the desert locust, would give them a new place to migrate towards.
Dr. Cressman is in constant contact with teams in the field to identify where the locusts are grouping so that they can be destroyed before they take to the air. Aircraft fly in to spray the insects with pesticides. If the swarms are not caught early, like a raging forest fire, they become impossible to control.
We see that there is a plague every 10 to 20 years. Now we're expecting that the next desert locust plague will be in the year 2025.
North Africa has experienced a prolonged drought. There is less rain, but when it comes, it is infrequent and short bursts. The rains trigger the female locusts to lay their eggs. There's a population explosion. Within 1 month, the locusts gather in the lost to the air. A plague of over 2 billion insects rise from the desert sands of Africa.
The locust swarm can arrive, go right through the farmer's field, and by midday he has nothing left of his crop.
The farmlands of Morocco and Algeria are totally destroyed in just 2 weeks.
The desert locust has evolved this magnificent survival mechanism called migration. How it does this is by moving with the winds.
Winds from the south blow the cloud of insects, which is 3 times the size of Manhattan, across the Mediterranean. Within 4 hours, they reach the Italian coast. 300 miles north lies Rome, the capital of Italy. One of the world's most famous tourist destinations is bustling with visitors and over 4 million locals.
When it's a really big swarm, you can't imagine the volume of the insects that are involved. It's like waves after waves after waves of insects coming at you, coming into the city. You see there's no end to it. It's just a continuation. It's a dark cloud of living creatures just embroiling the city. It's paradise to them, with its beautiful parks, its green trees.
Over 1 billion locusts have survived the long journey and flood down into the ancient streets. The sun is blacked out as the swarm fills the sky. The search for food takes them into every street.
Descend on some of the city's most famous monuments, like the Colosseum.
The stones of this ancient stadium become a resting ground for 1 billion locusts. Every piece of vegetation stripped bare, the swarm now moves further north to look for food. The Italian breadbasket is totally consumed, and some of the French vineyards are decimated. The locusts can live for 6 months, and the swarm has reached Paris. The Eiffel Tower is smothered by this devastating plague. Locusts need very little water to survive, so the future water shortages could bring paradise for these destructive creatures.
It's quite clear that the desert locust is much better armed to deal with climate change than the human race.
The slightest change in the Earth's climate patterns could put the food supply of many nations under threat from locusts. As the planet dries and water shortages grow, it's not only locust swarms that will cause problems. Huge areas of land will become like tinderboxes. The dried up forests will be consumed by megafires. All around the globe, rising temperatures, unregulated population growth, and pollution are leading to water shortages. Southeastern Australia, 2009.
The 7th of February will now be remembered as one of the darkest days in Australia's peacetime history.
173 people died as 400 wildfires raged out of control across the state of Victoria.
This is by far the worst disaster I've ever been involved with.
Towns and villages are wiped off the map. The fires in the region raged across 1,700 square miles and were the result of a 10-year drought. Yet this tragedy in Australia could be repeated across the globe in the future. As rainfall decreases, landscapes will dry out and wildfires are going to get bigger and more frequent. home to 50 million people. In the last 5 years, the rainfall in California alone has dropped by 48%. Many blame the drought on global warming. Without water, the forest fires become more frequent, and with global warming, fire seasons are longer and more severe. Once they ignite, there's an extra ingredient which transforms these California blazes into ferocious megafires. The Santa Ana winds form to the west of the Rockies and are heated as they blow over the deserts. And dead in the path of the Santa Ana winds lies Los Angeles, home to 4 million people. Fire consultant Scott Franklin was with the LA County Fire Department for 36 years.
I came to work in 1955, and we've never had fires as large as the ones we're experiencing now.
Add lifestyle to drought, and you have a tinderbox. Where LA residents see famously idyllic communities, Scott sees potential disaster.
You can just look around any community, not just this one, and they're a carbon copy of what they like. It's instant greenery, and it's highly flammable material.
Records show the 10 busiest fire seasons in the American West have occurred since 1999. The fire season now lasts 2 months longer, with 4 times as many fires. The forests are increasingly under threat, and emergency workers are now fighting fire with fire.
Good morning. Thank you all for showing up and helping us out with this. We're not going to need to be concerned.
Today, Tom Garcia is overseeing what is called a controlled burn here at Northern California's Lassen National Park. The idea is that a small controlled burn will help prevent a larger natural fire by consuming the highly combustible fuel that is collected on the forest floor.
Working around to the north, we've got the Chaos Tracks trail system, which is going to be our control line from there.
With military precision, a helicopter drops delayed action flammable pellets in the heart of the target burn zone. As the fire spreads down the hill, firewalkers take over.
So we light from uphill and we bring the fire down, which minimizes the amount of intensity and severity that we produce.
Within 2 hours, the controlled burn area turns into a massive forest fire, reaching temperatures of over 1,900 degrees. Clearly, this area was ready to go up. While we can protect some of our forests, controlled burns are not an option in places where people are living in or near the forests. So the dangerous fuel that makes for super hot fires continues to accumulate.
We can consider the fact that we are being set up for a catastrophic wildfire event by the severe drought that we're going through, and if we have an ignition in the adjacent hills and the natural vegetation burns, it can sweep directly into the community.
Everything is in place for Los Angeles to face the most deadly and destructive firestorm ever. It's October in Los Angeles, and after years of drought, the area is parched. At 10:30 a.m., it's already 100 degrees Fahrenheit and low humidity. A lightning strike ignites a fire in Santa Monica Mountains west of the city. It devours the dry wood which has built up for decades and quickly spreads east. At 12:30 p.m., the boiling hot Santa Ana desert winds steer the flames toward the coast.
If you have a 60-70 mile-an-hour wind speed, it's capable of throwing those embers out there sometimes over 2.5 to 3 miles.
A quarter of a million people in Brentwood, Pacific India's megafires can create their own river. At the leading edge is the deadly phenomenon that firefighters dread, the fire tornado. Just like a dust devil, a swirling vortex of flaming gases erupts when the superheated air rises rapidly, sucking in cold air.
It just feeds on itself and gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and then it'll move all over the property.
The fire tornado grows over 400 feet tall. It blazes through the forest at 30 miles per hour. Firefighters are powerless to contain the erratic movements. Suddenly, it swirls away from the main blaze towards a highway jammed with fleeing residents. Since 1923, a Hollywood sign has dominated the Hollywood Hills, becoming an icon. No more. Huge areas of the city are overwhelmed with loss of life and billions of dollars of property destroyed. It's not just America that is at risk. Emergency planners in Southeast Asia, Australia and Southern Africa have identified cities that are susceptible to monster fires in the future, with the same deadly consequences. Elsewhere across the globe, the lack of water could result in a battle of a different kind. People now fear that countries could go to war over water supplies. The world faces severe water shortages, which could unleash fierce dust storms, megafires, and locust plagues. And as water becomes scarce, disputes over this precious resource could lead to wars. For thousands of years, civilizations have grown and flourished on the nourishing banks of the world's great rivers. Today, their flows are controlled by people rather than nature. Large dams channel water for irrigation, hydroelectric power, and drinking water. But with less water, there's a growing potential for conflict.
Rivers are inherently an accident of geography when it comes to multiple waters. So upstream countries always have much more power over downstream countries. And that's what you see in the case of the Indus, that's what you see in the case of the Tigris and the Euphrates, that's what you see in the case of the Nile.
These tugs of water are already occurring, and it's taking huge diplomatic efforts to try and draw up treaties to set out how to share the remaining supplies.
Historically, nations have decided to cooperate over water rather than have tensions and conflict over it most of the time. But what concerns me now is that the past may not be a very good guide to the future.
The Himalayas. The glaciers from this mountain range provide 30% of the world's population with freshwater supplies. This is the source of some of the world's biggest rivers. The Ganges, the Indus, the Mekong and Yangtze. Scientists predict the Himalayan glaciers could disappear by 2035 as a warming planet leads to both evaporation and melting of the ice. Worse still, the monsoons which bring 80% of the yearly rainfall to some nations are failing to arrive, leading to calamitous reduction in the flow of those rivers. One of the biggest political flashpoints is the Indus River.
The Indus essentially is the lifeblood of Pakistan. If it wasn't for the waters of the Indus and its tributaries, the country would essentially be a desert.
But Pakistan has no control over what happens to this vital resource upstream.
The big problem politically is that all of the headwaters of the Indus and its tributaries are in India, which is of course not exactly on friendly terms with Pakistan.
Experts forecast in desperate times upstream nations will seek to secure their water supplies, building dams nothing less for those downstream. Globally, 40% of big dam construction is happening in India. As the water runs out, this can spark conflict. It's 2025, and the Himalayan glaciers have retreated by 60%. For the third year running, the monsoons did not bring the nurturing rains, and 50 million people have left their farms as their crops die from lack of water.
As river flows diminish and livelihoods from the land are no longer possible, then people are going to have to up and move.
India begins to build a huge new dam. It is solving its problems at the expense of those downstream who struggle with less. It's a desperate situation, pitting one people's survival against another. Diplomatic attempts to reach a compromise break down. The world watches as a terrifying conflict erupts over a dam. Trigger for wars. As water becomes scarce, it's a scenario that is all too possible. The Nile flows through 10 countries before it reaches Egypt. The Euphrates runs through Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. The River Jordan is shared by Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. In the future, preventing disputes over water from boiling over will be a major diplomatic challenge. While climate change brings less rainfall and water shortages to some part of the world, other areas enjoy violent downpours. For these parts, the flip side is not too little water, but too much. By 2070, scientists project that sea levels worldwide will rise by more than a foot and a half. It doesn't sound like much, but it means 150 million people are potentially exposed to catastrophic flooding. Shanghai, Dakar, Calcutta, Amsterdam, London, New Orleans and New York are all threatened by rising water. To make matters worse, changing weather patterns are already creating more torrential rains that result in sudden flooding. The nation's capital is already vulnerable to flooding.
Washington is built on an old infrastructure, now collapsing in many places, and so when you have a large rainfall event right over the city or in the region, you have a real problem dealing with it. The topography here in Washington, especially here in the area of the monuments, is relatively flat and low. So the river has ready access to downtown Washington through the street that lies behind me.
Like many low-lying cities, DC's water defenses were built before global warming. If sea level rises, the capital's in trouble. Hurricane Katrina is a stark reminder of what awaits a city without proper protection.
Katrina became a wake-up call for those who knew something might happen in the world but didn't do anything about it. We face the same thing here in Washington. We have a low levee, potential for major storms. We see that increasing over time. Somebody needs to be thinking about the tomorrow.
DC has already had a taste of what could come. In June 2006, a wet weather pattern created intense downpours inundating parts of the city.
So much water came on top of Washington that it flooded the downtown and shut it down for 3 days. Now, that's not what you want to happen in the capital of the United States.
Some of the nation's most important buildings, monuments, and museums are located in flood-prone areas. At present, Washington is only protected by these gentle landscaped earthworks, or levees.
After the 1936 flood, a big flood in Washington history, the Congress authorized the Army Corps of Engineers to build a levee here along Constitution Avenue to block the flow of the Potomac into downtown Washington.
But gaps were left in the levees for roads. When the Potomac floods, these gaps are plugged with sandbags. There are plans to replace the sandbags with gates, but will it be enough? DC has been hit by a Category 3 hurricane in the past. Over the next quarter of a century, the capital's fragile defenses may be tested by a fiercer hurricane with winds in excess of 150 miles per hour. The US Capitol, 2025. Throughout the night, there's been torrential rain in Washington, D.C., presaging the Category 4 storm that is coming. By 6 a.m., the rain has swollen the Potomac to dangerous levels.
We had nearly 3 months worth of rain in just 36 hours.
As the hurricane nears, winds conspire with the rising full moon tide to pile up the water dangerously. By 3 p.m., the storm makes landfall, and a 15-foot storm surge travels miles up the Potomac River and floods over the meager levees.
For any type of flood that comes from the Potomac, with the levees over top, it then flows down Constitution Avenue towards the Capitol and several buildings of the Smithsonian, which are on the north side of the mall.
The Washington Monument is surrounded by floodwater. Reagan National Airport is submerged. 4 months' rain has fallen in just 1 day. The next morning, Washington counts the cost. Some of the nation's most priceless treasures have been destroyed by the floodwaters. There's billions of dollars worth of damage, and the capital has ground to a halt.
There is a potential disaster. Everybody acknowledges that there's something out there, but nobody seems to be willing to step up to deal with it.
Washington is not alone. All around the globe, cities and even countries are located at or below sea level. As sea level rises, we must be prepared to either build bigger defenses or abandon whole areas to the sea. From fires, floods and droughts to plagues of locusts, the future seems dark, promising biblical-like devastation. Is there anything we can do to prevent future catastrophes? Fortunately, scientists are responding with some audacious solutions. Mega fires, dust storms, locust plagues. These catastrophes point to a stark fact. We are facing a future water apocalypse. But it's not inevitable. We have it within our power to prevent these disasters. Today's southern Texas is enduring its worst drought in 50 years. In 1 year alone, it's cost the state an estimated $3.6 billion in crop and livestock losses. But one farmer is determined to become the area's rainmaker.
In South Texas, we're primarily an agricultural community, be it ranching or farming. And drought has a tremendous effect.
Tommy Shearer is a cattle farmer who's using modern technology to solve an age-old problem. His mission is to bring relief by seeding clouds and literally pull rain out of the sky. Meteorologist Todd Flanagan runs the operation from the ground.
They'll take off from here and they'll go to the area of interest where these clouds are developing and getting rather large.
Flares containing the silver iodine are attached to the wing of the plane. Silver iodide is released and sucked into the cloud. Water forms crystals on the iodide particles. The crystals grow, eventually forming rain. Before the plane lands, the rain begins to fall.
We add on a yearly basis about 10 to 12% more rain than we would have gotten had we not had the program. And that equates into about $8 an acre foot, which is extremely cheap water.
But you can't make it rain in areas where there are no clouds. Some parts of the world are turning to the oceans for fresh water. Here on the shores of the Pacific near San Diego, they are building the biggest water desalination plant in the US. By 2012, they hope to produce 50 million gallons of drinking water a day from the ocean.
We can produce enough water to fill a swimming pool in about a minute.
The water is channeled through membranes that filter out all the salt particles.
When we're done processing the water, we get 1/2 cup of very salty seawater as a byproduct, and we get a 1/2 cup very high purity drinking water.
But this process is still expensive and out of reach of the world's poorer nations and those far from salt water. In Africa, they could be literally standing on a lifeline. The technological challenge is accessing this water, which lies thousands of feet beneath the ground. The Nubian Aquifer, a giant underground lake, contains enough water to last the whole continent for the next 100 years. And there is a more obvious solution for the Western world. Use less water. A person living in sub-Saharan Africa only uses 4 gallons a day. The same amount of water an American uses to flush a toilet, just once. By installing water-efficient appliances and being less wasteful, we could cut our water usage drastically.
In areas like the western United States, which every climate scientist will tell you is going to be stricken by longer, more severe, more protracted drought periods, that the way we manage water resources and the way we use water resources has to fundamentally change.
There are ways to avoid future catastrophes, the fires, the floods, the plagues the droughts. But acting now is our only option. Fresh water is the lifeblood of our planet. We must use it wisely. We have no choice, because without it, Earth's very future will be in